Hi and welcome to Orbit. This is the Leica Q3, Leica's newest compact full-frame camera with an improved 60 megapixel sensor and a lot of little details that I really liked. Here is my review. Chapter 1: Design. The Leica Q3 is the most beautiful camera on planet Earth. We don't even need to discuss that. Anyone that can see and has a spark of aesthetics can see that. Not a single line or curve too much. Every detail is tasteful, even the font deserves a prize. And it is not just a beautiful facade. The build quality is as good as it gets for a camera that costs as much as a kidney and a large coffee at Starbucks. It's just fantastic. Before I personally would spend much money on a watch, a painting or a piece of art, I would just buy the Leica Q3 and put it on a pedestal to admire the design. And when with you, it is definitely a status symbol. I was taken more seriously because of this camera, an effect that no other camera brand has. And the Leica Q3 is not just pretty, it's also tough. Splash and dust proof, which is surprisingly practical when you are in Hamburg for one weekend and then on the next one in Hawaii. It's pretty compact for a full frame camera with that lens, but not quite as compact as an Fuji X100V. There's only one thing that bothers me, but many will probably not care about it. The camera strap is made out of animal leather, so the Q3 is not vegan. There are two improvements over the Leica Q2 that I had wished for. First, the display can flip out, which makes it more versatile when shooting, and the mechanism feels very solid and the image quality is great. Second, there's now a thread inside the shutter release, so you can screw in a button in an accent color or wood, for example. And that personal touch makes every single Q3 a little bit different. And before I talk about the lens and the image quality, I want to empathize that I only had 3 weeks with this camera, so please keep that in mind. Not all of the pictures are a piece of art. Chapter 2: Lens. The lens is permanently attached to the camera. You cannot change it. It is a Leica 28mm Similux with an f1.7 aperture and a macro mode. The aperture ring is manual and the focus can be also pulled manually with the Leica typical hump. Is that what they call it? At Leica, Similux stands for particularly fast. So for what the lens can do, it is surprisingly small. I think the macro mode is cool, but I wonder if it doesn't add unnecessary weight and if it would have been a smarter idea to make this lens as small and light as possible. That aside, the lens is extremely impressive. Even wide open, it is crispy with minimal chromatic aberration and a subtle flare. This is what sunstars look like, and this is what the bokeh looks like. And you really have a lot of bokeh, even though the field of view is relatively wide. For point and shoot, 28mm is just right. Everything fits inside the frame. It is super similar of what you know from your smartphone, maybe too similar. But that is where the new sensor comes in play and it changes things quite a bit. Chapter 3: Sensor. Leica invented full frame. And there's a full frame sensor in here with 60 megapixel resolution. That is just brutal. It is the same sensor used in the Leica M11, which is why there's also the clever pixel winning feature. You don't have to shoot in the full 60 megapixel resolution. You can also shoot in 36 and 18 megapixel RAW. And this can be practical depending on the purpose and the situation, and you can see on how much it saves on data. But of course, I wanted to shoot in the full resolution. Because 28mm is a little bit too wide for me, but 60 megapixel is plenty sharp, I could always zoom in and straighten the image. At 5 times magnification, it is still 12 megapixel and 140mm. And you can have cropped windows displayed while shooting. The info is not saved, but it can help with framing. I expected a lot from 60 megapixel and it is indeed very sharp, but not quite as sharp as 50 megapixel on the Hasselblad with medium format. Here is it next to the Sony A7R5, which also has full frame and 60 megapixel. Just keep in mind, different lenses were used. You hear a lot about Leica color and the Leica pop, and it is true. In my impression, that is mostly due to the lens and it's something subtle. In some images, barely present, in others more noticeable. This is basically one of the most modern and best sensors you can get, and it shows in every picture. But I would never post the images unprocessed as I do with my Fujifilm film simulations. With the Q3 I always wanted to go back into my image editing software, but Leica colors are a good starting point. You can go from there wherever you want, in a totally natural situation, or totally overdone, or like it was old film. Underexposure can be saved way better than in every other camera in my experience. The only thing that is a bit distracting is the frequently too cool white balance. The high resolution coupled with the relatively wide angle lens means that this is the most flexible camera I've ever been with. You just point it in the direction you want to shoot, and at the end you can choose the crop and the colors. And that is a different approach from what I'm usually used to. For street photography though, it is great. I asked myself whether the dynamic range will improve if you drop down the megapixel, and here's the test. This is a RAW file and I pushed it in post, and you can see that the image with the least amount of resolution is also the one that lost the most information in the highlights and the shadows. Chapter 3.5. Autofocus. The Leica Q3 is the first Leica camera with a face detect autofocus. There's also a person and an eye detection, and it works quite reliably. It's not Sony, Canon or Fuji level, but it's good enough for quieter moments. I would not shoot sport or wildlife though, and sometimes the focus was slightly off. But there is an extremely good high quality manual focus. For example, when shooting the stars I had to use the manual focus, and there is an automatic astro mode with noise reduction, which is pretty cool. I only find it annoying that the resolution in the viewfinder drops significantly when you press the shutter button halfway down to focus, which makes it a bit difficult to estimate the focus. Otherwise, the viewfinder is wonderfully sharp, large and true to color. Chapter 3.75. Video. This clip of me is filmed with the Leica Q3 in 8K without a crop and no color grading. Even the autofocus was surprisingly good, and yeah, 8K is just extremely sharp. There is no log color profile, so you are somewhat limited in color grading, and the sensor stabilization also disappointed me. You need a tripod or a gimbal, and on the latter 28mm, and the small form factor with 8K is of course a fine thing. You can also shoot in macro mode, which looks pretty cool, and I'm positively surprised about this camera's video capabilities. Chapter 4. Software. The menu on this camera is really nice to look at and understandable. I do love the font, and the native design is German, and for me as a German that's great because all the texts fit perfectly. The camera is very simple to use, and it also has touch support, and the app worked for me both on iOS and Android quite fine with photo transfer or for live previews. And I want to add that Leica is a German brand, and this camera is made in Germany, and it has great customer service in case of problems, and the employees were paid fairly. Chapter 5. Battery. The battery life is something that I did not notice positively or negatively. It feels just like a regular camera, so it is enough for just one day, but not for a whole entire week. I had to charge it several times over my period of testing. I did not notice the battery in a positive or in a negative way. It was always good enough for a whole day, not for a week. I charged it every few days. The Leica Q2 had no ports. You always had to bring the battery charger with you. The Q3 now has USB-C. Of course, you can always buy a second battery for 170 euros or a wireless charging pad for 175 euros with a wireless charging handle for an additional 195 euros. Unfortunately, there's no internal memory like on the Leica M11. There's only a single SD card slot. It is difficult to judge the Leica Q3 because it is quite expensive, almost $6,000. But then you have to think about the lens, which is worth 4,000 euros, and the body itself is almost an M11, so it's 9,000 euros. And even if you're using a Sony a7R5, that's 4,500. So yeah, you're actually saving about $7,000 when buying this camera. Yeah, it's kind of cheap when you're looking at it that way, but you can't look at it that way, right? For my personal preference, the lens is still too wide. I would love a 35mm version or even 50mm version, and I hope that Leica will start selling some soon. I don't know. And for now, I think this camera is for professional photographers that want the best possible image quality on the go because they have an even better camera at home.